Welcome to our webinar on whether RTO actually works. We're just waiting for a few people to join, and we're going to get started in maybe like 30 seconds. So thanks everyone for hopping on the call. All right, great. I think we've got a good group here. I think we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Does RTO really work? My name is Annie Cosgrove. I am the Director of Analytics and Insights at Density. And I'm joined today by two awesome guests, our CEO, Andrew Farah, and Phil Kirschner, who is a workplace visionary who I think we all know well and needs a little introduction. So today we're going to be talking about an analysis that we put together at Density, looking at looking at a portfolio of spaces that went through an RTO. And so this includes over 115 floor plans across different geographies, so US and Europe and even Australia. And we looked at a 10-week period before companies went through an RTO and then a 10-week period after. And our goal here was to really understand, what is the impact of putting an RTO policy in place? What can we measure and kind of detect in that post RTO period? And what's interesting about this coming back to the office. And so today we're not going to go into the study in detail, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of the top insights from the study, and then I'm going to hand it off to Phil and Andrew, who agree on some things, disagree on some other things in terms of RTO, and have them give their perspective on kind of what this means to them and really in what they think about returning to the office. So we'll go through about 6 or 7 insights, have some commentary, and then at the end I'll save some time for questions, probably about 15 minutes. So hold your questions till the end, and we look forward to kind of having engagement from everyone. Great. All right. So getting into the first insight. So again, like I said, what we looked at companies across the globe going through an RTO, and we looked at a 10-week period before and a 10-week period after. And one of the surprising things we found was that there was a big dip in occupancy the week before RTO took effect. We played around with this enough to know that it was this was a real signal. It wasn't just like a holiday weekend before a particular policy went into place. This was something that we saw kind of across the board with all companies. I think maybe just to start off, I'll kind of question Andrew first. And so, Andrew, Density went through an RTO, right? You put an RTO policy in place for our company. What are the types of things that you think that we should be thinking about when we're putting an RTO policy in place? And then also kind of, any kind of reactions to this particular insight?
Yeah. So, well, first off, would you mind um, stop sharing real quick so I can see the crew? Um, we we required 4 days a week in person, and this was up from a policy of 3 days a week. And the structure of our organization, I think, um, we build hardware. We also build hardware that measures people in physical space. And so, if we wanted to be consistent with what we do, who we are, and who we do it for, we really needed to feel the pain that our customers are going through, particularly around allocation of space, headcount to different floors, um, space to teams and assignment. And I think at first it was an experiment, and then we saw meaningful improvements in the trust between teams, which is what I believe is the primary function of being in person is trust building. And I think that applies to people that are hybrid as well, or that are remote. You tend to see like offsites being like this afterglow of high trust and a lot of enthusiasm. And I think that can be really effective in a remote world. So those are some of the reasons why we applied it. And I think, it's remained 4 days a week with consistent time frame between 10 and 3 p.m. For some time now. And I would say it's largely been a success. I can speak to some of why I believe that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, so that's a great kind of setup here. So I think we'll move on to the next insight, and we can talk a little bit more about what happens after a policy is put in place. But uh, it'll be good to hear a little bit about your experience at Density. Okay, so back, can we pull up the slides again? And then we're going to go to our second insight. Okay, well, while we're waiting for them to pull up the slides again, Phil, what about this this drop in occupancy before an RTO policy is put in place?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of a clear sign, as we hear about a lot in the press, ongoing. And look, like I'm very pro office. I'm very pro good office and strong workplace experience. But I think it's a sign of something that's being done to people, like not with them. I think of like maybe a real life example. We will go through great efforts to do stuff that we derive joy from. Like I will happily travel an hour, 2 hours to a sporting event, and maybe think about like that same metaphor. People will go for hours and hours before the sporting event and tailgate or whatever the version is, depending on the sport. Like we lean into stuff that we really want to do, and I worry slash believe in that first point that it is just like a signal of, oh, if I'm gonna have to do something that I really don't want to on Monday, no one's really gonna care about now because they've set a line for compliance on Monday or whatever day it is. So I'm gonna take advantage of all the flexibility I have in this moment, and then lean in, which gets us, I think, into our second trend here.
Yeah, I think we were calling that like a mini moon, right? Like kind of get all your errands done, that last Friday of flexibility, and then before you're back in the office. So it's not
Yeah.
surprising to see, but it's definitely like a real signal in the data. Okay, so moving on to the next insight, and we'll get this going. So we know that occupancy spikes, and it was, consistent across the spaces we studied in that first week of RTO. But what we see over the next 10 weeks is a drop. And so, and this is about 10-12% over that 10-week period. And that's quite a bit of difference from the first week. So I guess, I mean, in general, like I mean, is it what does this mean, Phil? Like, is it again like that enthusiasm, that first week enthusiasm, we're losing it? Um, yeah, what would you say to a customer maybe who is seeing this, right? We're excited, our RTO policy worked, and then it kind of deflates.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Well, to be clear, like this kind of bump is something that you see commonly in, I'd say, almost any office move, renovation, refresh, repaint, whatever you want to call it,
yeah.
even before COVID, right? It's why people like me who do post-occupancy studies don't do it right away, because there's a little bit of a sugar rush, there's a bit of the shiny new toy. We go in to see the new thing that we've been waiting about for a long time. Unfortunately, in this case, I think it's more performative, right? And in particular, in a like cascade of compliance requirements, where the super boss says, we're going to start doing this on Monday or whatever it is, and I'm looking at you, people who work for me, and then they're looking at their people who work for them. It's almost believed like, well, we all have to be here, which is another way of saying the person who is looking for me is coming, so
Mhm.
I go. And
Mhm.
then the normal order of things will start to take over. Even, in one way, it's a tapering of compliance and people like knowing that there isn't a compelling enough reason to go, and multiple levels of managers allowing them to do that. But also reverting back to just the mean where we were never in the office 100% of the time before anyway, right? We are sick, we are away, we're on maternity leave, we're traveling for work, wherever, we're not around. So I think it's both a reversion and the wearing off of the shiny toy effect that predates COVID, but in particular, anything that is compliance oriented. The second that one manager is like, nah, it's okay, that will cascade in their part of the organization to a lot more no, it's okays, which is what I think we see here. But I'm curious to hear your guys' view, having done it for yourself and with your data.
Well, there's also another thing that ends up happening, which is people show up to comply, but then can't find the space to do the work that they need to do. And it's not because there doesn't exist the space, it's because space gets claimed, um, assigned or claimed. We were working with a customer who had a mandated return to office, and I was on site during the week that they were coming back, and I got asked many times, hey, where can I find like an open seat? Or where is my team seated? And I I would tell them politely, like, I don't work here, but I'd like help find them space, you know? And they would be like, can you please tell the head of real estate that um that like I can't find a desk and I was told to be on floor 5 and I've been wandering around for 20 minutes, like this RTO thing sucks. I'm going home. And what had ended up happening, we learned later, is that teams were assigned to neighborhoods, and then they sort of claimed the neighborhood for their teams, which is a pretty common thing that we saw pre-COVID, which is like, the supply and demand problem of like, people claiming ownership over meeting rooms or booking rooms for too long and not using them, or that type of sort of like protect an asset thing started to revert and happen again with RTO. And I think it put a lot of people, it gave a bad taste to a lot of folks. This also is totally cultural, totally has to do with your policies, your locale, how your teams deal with it, this type of stuff, how much agile space you have, how much hoteling you do. So a lot of this is the devil's in the details. But I do think there are some unique things about RTO and why people were like, this is ridiculous. I'm going back home. People aren't actually looking over my shoulder, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it sounds like being prepared for that first week and kind of having the space working in the way that already, so that, or knowing what you need for your employees to come back that first week. But there's also this excitement that Phil talked about, right? And some of that wearing off and some of going back to normal patterns. I think we can go to the next insight. So in addition to just occupancy increasing, kind of maybe even more compelling and more sustained was an increase that we saw in in-person collaboration. So this is just looking at time in meeting rooms. And so that's collaboration. That's collaboration we know is happening, people together in groups in meeting rooms. But this really sustained over the period, definitely a little bit higher that first week. So I'm interested in Phil. You have I know your opinions differ a little bit from Andrew's on RTO. So I want to talk a little bit about like where, like, so it seems like collaboration is definitely happening and sustaining. And is that the best place for it? Is the best place for collaboration in meetings, in person? Like what work needs to be together, I guess. Hmm?
As
On,
yeah, look, like what we learned early in COVID is, like, taking RTO aside, uh, when you ask someone how good is the place where you work today, private office, cubicle, home, whatever, how good is it for the things you need to do? It becomes very clear that offices generally are better for group-oriented things, right? I can say, yeah, I can be on Zoom, I can do webinars here from my home, I can read, do focused work, that's great. But sure, I will always be missing something that I can't quite replicate here, with the ability to be together in a place. And that introduces a couple of things. One, I do think when everyone's around, if I'm a manager, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that there are more bodies in the room and try to bring them into places where we can be collaborative. No, I do not think that all collaboration has to take place in enclosed spaces, but I do believe the odds of everybody being on that team being in exactly the same place at the same time these days in particular is almost zero. So you have to be inclusive of someone who is not there, which is going to lean people into enclosed spaces perhaps than even more they were using them pre-COVID. So maybe being in rooms now is a sign of like collaboration, at least in the hybrid sense of having people available for synchronous meetings. But also constantly find myself reminding clients that just because two people need to collaborate doesn't necessarily need to be in a room. And if it does need to be in a room, it doesn't necessarily have to be yours. For smaller groups and in cities like New York, where the city is a bit of a campus, and certainly coming with a shared WeWork mentality that you and I have, Annie, if you don't see collaboration happening in meeting rooms, it doesn't mean people aren't collaborating, right? A ton of it is happening digitally in a way we look for completely different.
Yeah. If I could, I think there's this like really important concept of critical mass that you touched on, which is like, do you have the people necessary in the same physical space at the same amount of time to be able to facilitate the type of collaboration that can happen that I think is like unique to humans in person? I think collaboration remotely is fundamentally different than collaboration in person. And I think being earnest about that, I think we as an industry would benefit a lot if we were more earnest about the fact that remote work is not the same, decidedly not the same as in-person work. And I think that that doesn't make it necessarily qualitatively worse or better on the whole, but I do think it's different. When to mute, how to raise your hand, when you can interrupt, how you interrupt, how long meetings are, whether or not they're scheduled for exactly 25 minutes and 30 minutes before you bump to the next one. There's like these things that qualitatively make them different and they should be measured differently. But this critical mass point is a really good one. If you don't have shared times, this is why I think hybrid is such a mess. If you don't have specific shared times, and I'm talking about a local locus of people. So Bay Area team members. If you don't have the same overlapping periods of time, days and times during the day, you run the risk of people sort of making their own schedules. It's like, come in 2 days a week, but you don't actually get any of the benefit of the policy. And it's just better to actually not have the policy, have a policy of fully remote or have a policy of fully hybrid. I think there's like, meetings are not necessarily good forms of work. Like getting in a meeting room is not necessarily like good work. But there was a very weird period of time where people were sort of half in, half out on the RTO thing. And you had this like, you ever been in a movie theater, Phil, where it's like you and two other people, like you never sit next to each other.
Yeah.
You act, it's like you spread out to almost equidistant. It's like there's some geometry automatically happening in everybody's head where like you are equidistant from one another and all of the various seats that are available. That's what happens in offices. And that's what happened when people were sort of half in, half out as they spread out. And then they used offices or conference rooms as private offices. And that is just a terrible way to use an office.
Yeah. Maybe just offer like some counterpoints because I want to make sure someone who posted a picture of us like sparring, I don't have to disagree with some things. Just three maybe really like semantic points, in particular, looking also at a question that just came up. So one, I agree that Zoom fatigue is the worst, or Teams fatigue, or whatever. It's like long meetings in tiny boxes where half or more of the people on it don't know how to properly either leverage the technology at their disposal or like look into a camera sometimes. Like there are just things we don't know, which makes it awful, especially for longer periods of time. That means that like as the technology gets better, it will change that opinion. So we shouldn't just say it's bad. I've had exposure even in my last role with large scale like video wall systems where you can see my feet. It means if I'm like sitting and crossing my legs, like, you could see all that. And that also means that I'm not remote because I don't have one in my home, but I might be in the New York office talking to you in the London office. And those kinds of systems do not have the same kind of fatigue that the tiny screen calls do. So the technologies are there, and I don't mean that everyone should be putting on a helmet like to get full immersive experiences. We don't like that either. But when we say like the remote video or remote technology bit is bad, my brain goes, for now. or unless you have access to some of these newer edge systems. Two, on the well, really maybe just like addressing Joseph's point in the chat, like I do believe there's something about osmosis. I also think osmosis is naturally exclusive, meaning that like we like to get osmosis and be around here on other people who are like us. And COVID taught us that not everyone felt the same way about being around each other all the time. Someone who doesn't look like me is less likely statistically to be mentored, get osmosis from me. And increasingly, there are AI tools that are getting better at teaching us things about our own behaviors that maybe our manager who sat right next to us didn't know or misguided us. So it's not an or, it's an and. Like the technology is going to keep getting better. We still will have to mentor and take advantage of the distinctly human things that we're together, but it's not just about like being there for the sake of being there, because that isn't necessarily right.
Yeah, but like Phil, I can upload 12 seconds of my voice and get to 11 labs and get a
Yeah.
replica of my voice speaking back to me. I can have ChatGPT 4.5 preview write really good prose, like really good prose, high quality briefs on stuff that might be within our wheelhouse. And Veo 3 or from Google, like it is extraordinarily realistic. Like the last, if we believe, even if you don't believe AGI and artificial superintelligence is like around the corner, the present set of tools are getting us to a point where we could have this discussion as proxies, right? I'm talking to Phil's proxy, Phil AI, Andrew AI, Annie AI, and it would be passable. It might not be great yet, but it would be passable.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
12 months, it would be like hard to distinguish. And like the last bastion is not going to necessarily be like more distributed stuff. It's going to be like, yo, let's go like shake hands. You and I got to meet for the first time. We sort of like
Yeah.
bantered a bit, online for a few years. Like we were sort of like caricatures of each other, perhaps in each other's minds for a few years. Maybe you didn't think about me at all, but I
Oh,
thought
I
about
did.
you all the time. I thought about you all the time. No, I'm just kidding. And then we got to meet for the first time at workspaces. And now all of a sudden, like the richness of the debate that we can have on any given Tuesday is elevated. Like it's like so much more
Fully agree.
fun and so much more interesting because there's this like foundation of a real human experience.
Yeah. And I believe we should continue to use that. I just think, and I now remember my third point, like one of the things I react to is when people say remote work is bad. Because
Sure.
when we think about it in an RTO context, like it's easy to make an argument, but remote work is also economically uplifting. So there are millions of people now, even just in the US, who have been able to sort of enter the workforce in a way that they couldn't before because they have a physical disability or something else that prevents them from going. So the availability of remote roles is good for a society. That does not mean it's good for any given company. But we have to hold sort of both. I completely agree with you. The more human, the better. And hopefully the ability to level up the middle ground stuff, like for non-native English speakers in your company, why shouldn't they be able to get like the Andrew avatar? Not that you wouldn't prefer to fly halfway around the world to speak to them, but sometimes you can't. So it's nice that they can be like, this is me-ish. It's better than reading an email. You sort of get a sense of my tone as I said this in another language, or maybe it's been translated. But in person will always be better, and maybe this will drive up the bar for what we take advantage of when we are actually together, and not just for meetings, as you said, as we do. But I know we have to keep it.
No, yeah, we don't actually. We're good. I find the AI avatar stuff terrifying, but it is definitely important to think about. I guess so. Just kind of listening to both of you, I'm thinking there. I think we all can agree that meeting people, Andrew met Phil, that kind of enriched their relationship in person in real life is very important. But is requiring people to be in the office on the same schedule? Is it like having human interaction? We all agree that. But like is having the policy in place, right? Like is making that statement for a company, is that necessary? And I'm going off script. So
100%. 100%. And can I say
Mhm.
why? I think that like I gave a talk I think, where it said something to the effect, it was at Workspaces a couple of years ago, and I think it said something like, um, uh, I think that we're pretty milquetoast on our like willingness to be honest with our team members. We like as an industry, and specifically C-level leadership. I think C-level leadership is like kind of JV when it comes to the policies around RTO. And I think it's because they're scared of attrition. And I think they're scared of the ability to recruit. And I think that they are watered down by their like PR and legal teams on being explicit about why there is a policy, what that policy is, and what the consequences are to the company in the event that people don't like the policy or it doesn't fit their life. And like, I'll just give a practical example of what I mean by this. I am convinced that for the vast majority of policies, 80% of policies that a company makes, it is in the best interest of both the employee, team member, and the company. And I believe that there are about 20%, and this is an approximation, but about 20% of policies are not in the best interests of employees. And in that 20%, a company, a leadership team, and ought to be expected to always prioritize the company over the individuals. That's like the function of a company. And then they need to be comfortable dealing with the consequences, which are that like people will vote with their feet. And so you can choose to be fully remote. You can choose to be 2 days a week. You can choose to be a couple times a quarter. You can choose to be 5 days a week. But then be clear with your team about like why you're doing that. And then be comfortable with the consequences when they say this isn't for me. And I think we should say those words out loud to people instead of sort of pretending like everybody is like kumbaya and like we're all doing this for everybody's best interest. Like there is a divergence sometimes, and companies would do, I think, well to call that out and talk about the divergence and why they have decided it.
Yeah, you make me think of again, Andy and I have this shared history of, in particular, the word family was thrown on a lot. Um, I still do this with members of my old team. It's like, the group chats about family. But I appreciate that other leaders, in particular, who is it, Toby Lucky,
Mm-hmm.
Shopify, also interesting other sorts of announcements in his leadership style or AI, but they say, I think pretty explicitly on their careers pages and everything, they're like, we are not a family, we are a team, which means we work together. We look for better ways to work together all the time, but we are not relatives, which means, to your point, Andrew, like some of us may not always be here, right? Like it is business first. We want it to be a positive experience for you, and it's a bit of meritocracy, but like, let's not hide it. And all this feels very relevant, retirement for me, off the back of a conference a couple of days ago on like employer value prop and employer branding, where the clear message was like, we want transparency. Back to early COVID, like in that moment of harrowing experience for everybody and real threat to life safety, a lot of leaders became humans overnight.
Totally.
Like all of a sudden, right out of nowhere, and nobody wanted that situation. But they're like, oh wow, I'm seeing real you now. It's not like CEO Andrew, it's Andrew. And there's been a bit of a like that's left. We're back in kind of corporate land now, and employees miss the authenticity. So I think there's a gap in how deep we go in truly defining changes. We were right about it this week, but that includes like what we've decided to do, why we have decided to do it, who made the decision that something was broken, and this could be RTO, it could be we're switching email systems, doesn't matter. Who made that decision? Like, who's gonna keep track of how it's going? What would happen if it doesn't go well? Like how few leadership teams maybe actually think through all right, we're convinced we're gonna ask people to come back. If attrition goes from here to here, whatever number we don't want to cross, what happens then? What do we do? And how much of that are you willing to almost tell employees up front? Because you could say, Andrew, like, I think the data tells me we sell more when we're all here together. And when we sell more, we make more money for everybody. More hiring, more like everything good. And if that's true pretty quickly, I think your employees are like, cool. We did sign up to work for this company. I like working here. So we want us to be successful. But if it doesn't prove out, they're going to be like, well, what now? Because it wasn't that. So I agree, like try deeper, or just more depth in the answer. So why, who, when, what?
I guess, have you seen that? So kind of that shared context, right? Or the people really understanding why we're doing this and what we're doing and how we're going to measure how it's going. Like, kind of going back to one of the insights from before where we saw that occupancy drop off. Like what do you, how do you, is that maybe because there wasn't that shared context, or like how do you sustain, how do you get people to want to continue to be together? Right. And maybe Andrew, you have experience in our San Francisco office with this. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Any comments on that? How to
I
keep,
mean, I have like a
yeah.
pretty practical one. So I realize like I'm pretty like pro R RTO. Like I would put myself in the camp of pro return to office, like in-person
But we,
teams.
we invited you because you're pro RTO.
Right, yeah, right. Thanks. Much appreciated, Annie. Um, I've been doing this for 11 years, density for 11 years. There was like a 12th year that nobody knows about before the official founding of density. Uh, Ali, you've got a great horse face on your
Sorry
video.
about.
No, that's okay. So I when we started as a distributed team. Half of our founders were actually in New York, and half of our founders were in San Francisco. We even had one who was in Syracuse, New York. So I say this like from the perspective of like someone who has lived more than half a dozen years as a distributed team and currently works with a team that is distributed. Annie's in New York. I'm in San Francisco. We have people in Syracuse. Like we are not all located in the same location. We do something called sit down once a week or once every other week, and we do all hands once every other week. So like they sort of alternate on Thursdays. And the number of questions and debates that come up during sit down, which is the in-person version, is like 50x the number of questions and debates that happen distributed. And I'm sure everyone on this call has been to a distributed all hands before. And some cultures are really good about using questions and like lots of debate distributed, but it's substantially harder to be able to like pull out of people or feel comfortable to like raise your hand um, in a distributed fashion than I think it can be when you are in person. You're sitting next to someone and it feels more casual. It feels less formal. And all hands doesn't feel like a television show. So it's like a practical example of like I think some of the differences. We have both, and there are real benefits to having both. But I think there's a real loss. You almost don't know what you're missing out on if you don't have a ritual that can for teams to be in person. And that ritual can be quarterly, but I would just say like if you don't have a ritual around in person, I think there's something that's actually you don't even know what you're missing.
Okay, let's move to the next insight. So I think we kind of covered this here. We definitely saw an increase in collaboration as well as an increase in group sizes, right? So less one-person meetings, a better use of meeting rooms for the companies that went through RTO, and higher quality collaboration. So we've kind of covered that. We can go to the next insight. I want to talk a little bit about the spaces we design to accommodate work, right? And what the workplace should look like for RTO. So in this visualization, you see a measure of how desks were used before companies went through an RTO and then after. The darker blue all the way to the end is what we call deep work. So this is longer, continuous sessions of work happening at desks. We look at behavior over the course of the day, and then we categorize desk usage into those patterns basically to get to really what was happening at a desk, not just whether or not it was used. And so deep work is all the way to the right in blue, and then the kind of teal cyan color in the middle is in and out. So that's just kind of drop in sessions throughout the day. And then pit stop in orange is just someone, stopping by to maybe drop off their coat, or really like a brief moments at their desk throughout the day. And then gray is not used desks. So those are desks that were not touched all day and are really, really not used at all. And so, of course, with people coming back to the office, we saw an increase from the top bar to the bottom bar. We saw an increase in desk usage. But we didn't actually see a big increase in deep work. We actually saw a larger increase in those like quick stops, so that kind of in and out behavior. So I'm interested in talking about kind of how we can design our spaces to accommodate this behavior. We know people are not just coming into the office to sit at their desk. What should we be thinking about when designing a workplace that's going through an RTO, or even just a workplace, given kind of these types of behaviors? And maybe I'll give this one to Phil. Yeah.
Yeah. So like you look at a chart like this, no matter what you want to think about RTO, the thing that's still pretty glaring is that 49, really 50% gray box. Right? There's still a lot of waste.
Right.
So my advice to the client is like, yeah, too big. And we are all still talking about desk measurements, right? That doesn't mean that people aren't in other places.
There are other places.
We are, yeah, right. And if we're either in rooms or in the bazillions of other seats that like aren't really seats, or we're at the coffee shop downstairs, or where we're like in, but we're not. I had a slide that I used to cart around a bit because I can remember it's the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg. One of them does these delightful like office tour articles every so often. And like 2-3 years ago, they did one with LinkedIn, who had just renovated their office like in situ, same floor, same thing. And they did something really delightful, which was showing the floor plan for just a second. But it was enough to be like, okay, you can see how it's changed. And it basically went from, call it 1/3 of the space being for us and 2/3 of the space being for me, to the opposite. And that's what we're seeing, is like a massive swing in just diverse range of collaborative or informal settings to allow for this. Like when I'm in for groups and I'm lily padding around. And when I'm done, or if my role is much more deep work oriented, I'm probably not here. I'm probably somewhere else. And yeah, Kevin's making a good point here on like office size. Are we talking about campuses or little offices? But by and large, if the purpose for most spaces is more group oriented than individual oriented, and you allow for people to take the individual work where it makes the most sense for them, we should be designing more like flipping the ratio for more collaborative and diverse spaces. And assume, some people are going to come for deep work, maybe because they have 6 kids and 2 dogs in their house and they can't do that at home, so they'll want to come to you. But it isn't what you should be anchoring most of the time.
Okay, we'll move on to the next insight. So in addition to looking at the types of work, we kind of looked in detail at a few of our customers in the analysis. And the first customer on the left was going from no days in office to 3 days in office, and then the customer on the right was shifting to 5 days in office. And so what we're showing here is just that RTO can look really different for different companies. I think Phil and Andrew, you both talked about kind of different policies to kind of meet the needs of different work styles or cultures. But we saw a few interesting things here. We saw in the first one, you can see that shifting to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we saw a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday increase, but actually Mondays and Fridays went down. And then in the second example, this company went to a 5-day in office policy, but Fridays are still much lower, right? So it can look different for different companies. And it definitely seems like it's a balance between achieving what you're asking for, and then also getting people to follow that. So there's some kind of sweet spot in terms of what the mandate is and what people actually do and what you actually need. So maybe Phil, back to you. What's your, like in designing an RTO policy or a kind of hybrid in-office policy for a company, what would the ideal be to you? And again, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, like none of the ideal for me. Like occupancy or presence is an input; it's not an output.
Mhm.
So no version of it is something I will ever ultimately rely on or believe. If if you believe, as I use like sales as an example before, the purpose of your office is to sell more stuff, then you should be able to, or like hire more people, reduce attrition, or increase innovation, or make the if number one purpose is like make your clients reach for their checkbook as quickly as they can, that's great. Then you say, right, this is not an office, this is our sales hub or whatever it is. It's our client experience zone, and I love thinking about like having a metaphorical conversation with your building every couple of weeks or months, like we do with a client or sales team. Let's have our quarterly building review. I sit you down the building across from me in the room and say, you're supposed to have made all my clients reach for their, for their checkbooks. Did you? And one challenge is a lot of real estate groups, if you ask them that question on behalf of the building, can't answer the question. They don't, it is not something that has been prioritized to them. They don't have access to, let's say, like revenue by location, whatever that version is for your company. So they can't even answer. But if they did, and if it is the same from before Fancy New Client Hub to after Fancy New Client Hub, then you get to ask yourself the question, like, what's wrong? Is it that, and also not also assuming that it's immediately occupancy, right? It could be client invitations, or that people don't know how to use the fancy new visitor registration and visitor experience system that you gave them. Or that the leaders specifically are the ones who were not there bringing in new clients or coaching the new kids how to do that. We have to try to just limit the purpose of the spaces that we have and measure their outcomes like you do a retail store or a hotel or something else where it's clear. And it's very, very difficult, especially for large scale campuses where you may have like hundreds or thousands of people in one metropolitan area. But we have to try, because then you don't answer it like, how do you get more people to show up? It's show me what actions you have tried to figure out, making that needle go up.
Yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
Phil, do you think that workplace leaders, real estate heads, have more authority, less authority, or the same authority, and perhaps autonomy maybe is a better term than authority, pre and post pandemic, or pre and post pandemic? Do you think these are all, I think, fantastic ideas?
Yeah.
And I'm curious how much you think the workplace function remains a service provider to the business, and how much of it is a strategic partner to the business.
Yeah. I just sort of wrote about this, having gone to a Coronet conference where the CEO of Coronet said, we're not just a cost center anymore. And then a very senior real estate leader at the end of it said, we're a cost center. Like, so we haven't changed enough yet. I think COVID had this really interesting thing. It slingshotted the super leaders up. They maybe moved into HR. They're more strategically looked at as kind of chief places officer construct. They're real advisors to the business in M&A and supply chain, depending on the industry. But I unfortunately feel like a vast majority maybe got elevated into the room for a little while around like when we can return and how do we design our offices and doing touchless this and that. And then like it's waned. So they fell maybe back, not just back into finance, but I know an unfortunate multiple number of examples where like someone used to report into like CFO, but now reports into procurement. Like they went down. So I don't know what that says. It's like, it's really difficult. Most of these leaders are amazing. They're just positioned in a place that is not strategic and kind of held there under the weight of some higher force. But I'm endlessly optimistic about the ability to move up by looking for other sources of data and being able to come forward and be like, I can tell you what certain designs do to our sales team's ability to drive revenue. And this was Andy's life at WeWork, right? It was like, how did design choices we made affect occupancy? And in the WeWork parlance, occupancy is the output because people pay. But in a normal office, it's not.
Yeah. So definitely, measurement is important, right? And kind of like understanding what the output is that you're looking for and measuring that and then iterating. And then also, I think a good point by Andrew on where workplace teams sit and who they kind of respond to and where the money comes from. Um, and I think that it makes what all of us do pretty complex, right? Like who's funding the experience for employees. So this maybe is a good lead into our last insight. And also, I know we're running out of time. So if anyone has questions, we're going to open it up for questions. If you want to submit them in the chat right now, we will come to them right after this slide. So yeah, thank you in advance. Okay, so one of the things we looked at, so we're kind of trying to quantify the what are the cost savings of RTO, or what's that kind of financial impact, and thinking about our real estate teams that are responsible for our leases and paying the rent. If you look at the with added employees in your space, your cost per employee goes down, right? So what we found in the study in the spaces we looked at, that was on average about $3,000 per employee. So you're saving this money on rent, and that's great, right? But I mean, is that kind of, I mean, Andrew, how do you think about this when you, in terms of, we've talked about kind of the quality of in-person time, but thinking about the bottom line for your company, what $3,000 per employee, it doesn't really seem like that much. Is that, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
yeah,
sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
no, go. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think, real estate is the second most expensive thing next to payroll. And so I think, depending on your head count, that can be a very meaningful, drop in overall costs. But I think this comes back to Phil's point, which is like, what is the purpose of the spend? Like, why do you spend money on a building?
Yeah.
And like, buildings are there to serve humans. Just to be clear, like, we didn't build buildings for ants. We didn't build buildings to like get design awards. I mean, some of us did, but like most of us are building buildings for the human use of that building. And so I would take that $10,000 and say, like, how much of that is actually returning any value?
Mhm.
But in order to be able to answer that question, you have to know what the value, how you're determining value. And man, 2020, pre-2020, like ZERP era, we like lost our minds on spend. We just like did not care. And you all frankly have more experience with this than I do, given just like how much was going into building more buildings and hiring more people. And yeah, so I'm really curious, Phil, your perspective, but I would
Yeah,
very much say we agree.
honestly, this one made me think of like we need new metrics and think about outcome differently for buildings. I really think they're not just for ants, which I hope was a Zoolander reference because that's how I took it.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
uh,
Definitely.
um, one of the cooler metrics that I have seen in a post-COVID world that I've put out as a case study myself is Atlassian has this really clever metric they call cost per visit, which is very similar math to this, right? Just like how much am I spending in real estate total, rent, operations, everything, divided by the number of humans who've walked in the place. And it could be the same person day over day every day. It could be different people. It could be guests. They do it from their Wi-Fi, if I remember right. So device registration, just because that's easier for them. But they still do cost per square foot. They still do density. They still do all the other normal metrics like utilization. But the leader of the real estate team says that making that kind of cost per visit the first column on the page with the executives, so to speak, gave them, I love this line, like gave them access to their common sense. Because even if you're not a real estate person, talking about a visit instead of per person makes you almost question, why were they there? Like, what was the draw? And then you get into like, what the visit from someone who lives within 20, 30 minutes commute is different than someone who flew halfway across the country. Those are different kinds of visits. And you could do that to determine, is this our gathering hub as opposed to just day-to-day productivity for people local in a market? But I just love the idea of like thinking about the visit instead of the person, even though it's the same numbers oriented differently, because it allows you to engage with leaders on this question in a way that just like cost per square foot maybe alienates them a little bit if they're not in the real estate world.
Yeah, and it focuses around the experience, which, right, the
Yes.
visit, the experience, and like what that value of that in-person time was. So
Yes, right. And there's no benchmark for this at
no.
all. But maybe you, with site A to B to C in your own portfolio, these can have a real conversation. Like, wow, that's a lot of money we're paying for every time somebody walks in the office in Cincinnati.
Right.
But then you're having a productive conversation, and not just like looking at rent figures.
Okay, so I think we're out of time. There's a lot to talk about. I think I'll give you a quick what we're moving to Q&A, but just a quick couple moments. Thanks for Andrew and Phil. If you have any closing statements that you'd want to just kind of generally your thoughts on the on RTO, you could share them now, and then we'll give people a little bit of time to ask some questions. Yeah.
Andrew.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I think this isn't quite Studio Ghibli, but like your Chat GPT image generation skills are pretty good. That was gonna be maybe part one of my closing statement. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts. I think I guess like maybe my primary perspective is just like I think we're more aligned on things
Yeah.
than sort of apart. I think we might disagree in some of like the practical experiments to run and like how hard nosed, since my nose is red, both of our noses are red in this image, how hard nosed to be around like certain things so that you can have a more empirical like measure of like how effective the experiment it is or is. And then, I guess the only other point that I would make is like, I think obviously I'm biased towards measuring how space is used because of what density does, but sort of trying to set aside my bias for a second and sort of speaking just um, as rationally as I can. I think there's a lot of politics to space design and allocation. I think it has a lot more to do when you don't have data with who has influence. The people who have influence get space. The people who have influence get the best space. The people who have influence get allocated desks. The people who have big hiring plans get lots more space. But when you look at the data of how many spaces that were allocated to a team but were unused, you'll see large swaths of desks that could otherwise go to other team members who are looking for them, by the way. And that when you present an otherwise rational, even if they are political leader with fundamental data about what is happening to the things that they were assigned to the assets they were assigned, they're usually very rational about making change. Oh, I'm not using that. Cool, great. Like, let's get rid of it. But in the absence of that, politics takes over. Vibes
Yeah.
take over.
Okay, quick Phil, because we want to leave a
Yeah.
couple
So,
minutes.
so like super bad, like no matter what you think about Office, crystal clear ways of working is objectively good for your company. That's been proven like before and after all as a McKinsey. It helps with being distributed, even like office to office at the same company. And AI is gonna make it worse. Remote work's gonna make it worse. Gig work's gonna make it worse. Like we have to focus on clear ways of working. Not every time you have to be with someone has to be in an office you control. And then maybe since you're willing to speak one way, Andrew, like you're in the sensor business, I believe in sensors. I just don't think that it's like in the one place, right? We're going to be looking to
I
the
agree.
providers of spaces to be able to give us data that they get from sensors as much as we get it from our own that we've put in place in our space, and like having to triangulate all that a little bit more to form a better picture of how work is done. So there's a lot of room to grow on all fronts.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much to both of you. So we don't seem to have too many questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute, come off video and engage, we would love to hear. Okay, we have one, but we would love to hear questions directly from you. Let's see. Here's one from Joseph Dubois. Is it fair to say what I heard from you both, no matter the strategy, is that the solution needs to be led by leadership and delivering the why behind the design? So leading RTO by, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say yes. Any kind of change, right? Starts with like, do you know what change you're actually trying to put in place, and what is the
Yep.
vision that you set? Like, otherwise the whole thing will fail. Saying nothing of leadership's own participation in that story, or getting the employees involved, and all sorts of sustaining measures for RTO, or again, new email system, whatever. Changes change, and like leaders who aren't transparent and tell the whole why, I think you don't get the level of transformation success that you.
It also sets up workplace and real estate teams to fail. When leadership is unclear, they're left to answer very basic questions about why these policies have changed. And they're like, I'm not getting good enough answers to give you a good enough answer. And so it's got to start with leaders. And they got to be willing to take the licks of whatever may happen on the other side of those policies.
Well, let's see. Any other
We're
questions?
just in from Lauren right there.
Oh,
There's a-
yeah. Go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
So Lauren asks how Andrew, so density, is measuring success of the increase to 4 days per week at density. So is there data around more collaboration and more trust from making this change?
Yeah. Trust is a hard one to measure. But I can speak to like a couple empirical things. Trust is a hard one to measure empirically, but I can speak to a couple things that we've looked at to determine whether or not it's working. We have set hours between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. every day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. You need to be in office during those times. And the reason for that, the why, is so that people can schedule meetings without fear of scheduling over your commute or scheduling over like a personal thing that you have to do. It's just actually really useful to know, oh, well, you'll probably be in the office around that time, so I can schedule it without worrying about that. It reduces coordination cost. Um, we've seen that working well. We also do Wednesdays at work from anywhere. So choose your own adventure, because we think remote work is like extremely useful for like heads down focus work. Um, and we have consistently seen people show up earlier than 10 a.m. and stay substantially later than 3 p.m. Even though there's commute on either side of those that are not good. So that's like one example of the things that we've used to measure. And then we also look at sort of overall assigned team to the space and what the total percentage of folks are that show up during those times or adhere to the policy. And it's not about being individually punitive so much as is the office a place that people want to be.
All right. Any last questions? Thanks, Lauren. We see you. We're gonna wrap up just on time.
Can I make one quick observation?
Yep.
Okay, my name's David Dixon. I work with a great big global company called Stantec. I'm Stantec's Urban Places Fellow, and this is more a comment, but one of the things that we do a lot of planning for innovation districts, probably better termed innovation ecosystems at this point. And one of the observations that has really come to us from clients is that the chance meetings between their folks and folks who work for other companies are way down when folks aren't in the office, because generally the offices are in proximity to each other. And that this has really impacted, we had a group of clients in Canada who referred to their patient productivity index. How they measured it, I don't know, but it was down 56% during the pandemic, and that really bothered them, meaning the new ideas coming into the innovation pipeline were really down. And I know when we're talking with companies about where they in this sort of idea economy, where they want to locate cities, at a very large scale, it is cities that not only attract and retain talent, but have environments these companies can locate in that promote creative collisions, have become increasingly important as a consideration.
Yeah.
I'd
So
say
not
I think
just
that's an amazing point. Like coming again, like co-working shared background for Andy and I. Like, I believe space like creates collisions. The worst part though is enterprises are like, I want you to be in the building and I want you to sit here. Back to the point on like desk sharing. Desk sharing is usually shown as an efficiency play. I think flexibility and mobility are a business opportunity, because if you're in one of those environments, And there's some little hackathon or lunch or whatever it is happening just across the way that you should really go to. One day our little co-pilot's just going to go ding, like that thing's happening right now. You should go. And we need the kind of culture and training and role modeling for you to be able to get up from your desk and go like, this is good for me. And not fear that if I'm not at my desk, I'm not going to be counted and someone's going to say they're not productive.
Can I share a brief story? Annie, I know that we're over time, but we had someone who had like a migraine and needed to leave early from the office. And when they came back the next day, someone else in the office we have Rocher chocolates, had put Rocher chocolates in the shape of a smiley face on this person's desk. The person came over to their desk, laughed out loud, and then proceeded to pick up each of the Rocher chocolates. He took one and then distributed the remaining Rocher chocolates to all of like their neighbor. Everyone else proceeded to like come back to their desk and like find a chocolate waiting for them. And what mattered, in my opinion, in that like whole story was not the chocolate, nor like the sense of, community that created, but rather the trust that it engendered, so that when those very people end up disagreeing in a meeting 2 hours later and yelling at each other about an idea, it's about the idea, not about the person. And that is like a uniquely human experience that is easier to facilitate in person. It's not impossible to facilitate distributed, it's just harder. And I think it's like the type of thing that I think a lot of leaders like to say, well, water cooler talk will result in more creativity. And I don't know that I totally buy that. I think that like creating collisions is really useful, but it can't be the only reason. There's something beneath that. And I think a lot of it has to do with trust.
We use the term trusted working relationships constantly in our practice. And as it's the ones that really are productive. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your question and comment. And thanks, Andrew and Phil, for your time. It was a great discussion. Appreciate everyone tuning in. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Annie.